Amboseli, the land of giants. There is no better place in Africa to photograph elephants than Amboseli, which is home to some of the last great tusked elephants in the world. After spending time with gorillas in Rwanda, I journeyed to the short grass plains of southern Kenya in search of the big tuskers. Almost immediately upon entering the park, we encountered our first elephant, a large bull that was feeding in the marshes in the afternoon heat. Amboseli had been suffering from a severe drought over the last 2 years, but finally rain had fallen and transformed the dusty landscape into a green paradise again. After a short game drive en route to our lodge, we finally checked in to the Amboseli Serena Lodge. I quickly settled into my room and enjoyed the scenery, but then it was back out on the road for my first proper safari. Just outside the lodge, we had spotted a film crew that was following one large elephant out in the distance. If someone is filming elephants in Amboseli, you can almost guarantee that they're filming a big tusker. And it was! This is one of Amboseli's famous residents known as Pascal, who has tusks that each weigh over 100 pounds. Pascal is known for having a droopy ear, so it was pretty easy to recognize him. Still, he's a magnificent elephant, and on my first safari I had already photographed one of the big tuskers. Eventually Pascal moved off, so we went in search of other wildlife, like these grazing resident wildebeest. Or a crowned crane making its way through the tall grass. We later found multiple herds of elephants, which were all happily eating away at some of the fresh green grass. Big tuskers are great, but I also love watching the dynamics between elephant families as well. The last few times I had come to Amboseli had been during the dry season, where it was almost depressing with how barren the landscape looked. But the rains had transformed the park into lush greenery, which made for a much happier atmosphere. Nearby, there were a couple of bull elephants as well, but none of them could compare in size to Pascal, who we had seen earlier. The genes for long-tusked elephants exist in much of the Amboseli population, and given enough time and space to grow, these bulls could one day rival the other biggest tuskers in the park. If it wasn't obvious already, this was clearly turning into a very elephant-centric trip, which was exactly what I had hoped for. On my first day alone, I had already taken some of my favorite elephant photos yet. Eventually, we moved on and looked for some other subjects to focus on. Just as the day was coming to an end, we found the resident lion pride on the move near our lodge. Unfortunately, they were way too far for photos, especially with low light, but it was a nice sighting regardless. The next morning began with exactly what I had hoped for, a clear view of Mount Kilimanjaro. And before I knew it, a herd of elephants came out of the woodlands and posed in front of the mountain. An absolute dream encounter first thing in the morning. Further down the road, we spotted another herd that was on the move. If they followed the same path, they too would pose for an amazing photo with the mountain as a backdrop. Not only that, but one of the females in the herd had the long, thin tusks that are so famously found in elephants in Amboseli. Just as expected, the herd finally crossed the road, and Kilimanjaro once again gave me some of those classic Amboseli shots. These are the sorts of moments that photographers dream of, but just being in the presence of elephants is such a special thing to experience. Out in the distance, we spotted a huge male elephant that was chasing after the herd. It was the big Tusker, Michael. He was clearly in must, a state in elephants where they are fueled with testosterone and are aggressively looking to mate. Generally, family herds of elephants try to move away from bulls in must, because they can be highly aggressive and unpredictable, especially towards young calves. Unfortunately, I was shooting directly into the light, which forced me to drastically overexpose for mainly black and white shots. There were other bulls in the herd, setting the scene for what could have been a very big confrontation between them and Michael. But Michael remained calm and added to my already impressive photo collection for the day. On the radio, we heard of another group of bachelor males right in front of the mountain. Elephants in Mount Kilimanjaro. This is why I came to Amboseli. I grabbed a couple of last landscape shots of Kilimanjaro after the elephants moved off. Nothing was going to top this scene, so I called my morning drive a success and headed back to camp. Later that afternoon, we decided to search for some of Amboseli's other famous residents. This was going to be a bird safari, which started off with a family of crowned cranes on the move. Finally, we found a huge flock of flamingos, which called the lakes of Amboseli home during the rainy season. The idea was to catch some of them in flight in front of Kilimanjaro, but they seemed content to just keep eating. Or dancing. Honestly, it was hard to tell the difference. Occasionally a small flock would fly by, but usually too far off from the main group to inspire the rest to take flight. Still, flamingos in flight are always worth shooting, even without a good backdrop. On a small nearby reed, we even spotted a yellow bishop, a colorful fuzzy bird that I had never photographed before. It was a nice change of scenery to focus on other subjects other than elephants after such an elephant-heavy morning, and we ended our day with a nice giraffe eating amongst the palms. The following morning we went out looking for lions, but surprise, we got distracted by elephants again. This was the famous EB family, who are descended from Echo, one of the biggest female tuskers in Amboseli's history. Looking at them, you can clearly see how the genes for those long thin tusks have survived. As the sun began to rise, I knew that this was a chance for some elephant shots in golden light. Thankfully, they moved into position perfectly, leading to even more iconic Amboseli photos. Oh yeah, we did end up finding a lion, but honestly, I just knew that this was going to be another elephant day, and decided to leave him be. Sometimes you just have to follow your intuition and take what the safari gives you. Like these two young bull elephants that were playing with their trunks as the sun hit them in just the right spot. The two males probably belonged to a nearby herd, and were quickly approaching the age where they would be kicked out and have to find their own place in the world. These were play fights for now, but they were also practice for the future, when they would eventually have to fight other males for dominance. As the morning continued, the fights began to get more and more aggressive, where you could clearly see the power that these two giants had as they battled it out across the savannah. The nearby herd started to become agitated. Even young bulls fighting were enough to get them to flee. We drove further down the road to intercept the moving herd, and I came away with some great photos of the sighting in perfect light. After leaving the herd, we went out in search of another big tusker, and found one dusting himself way out towards the park boundary. After patiently waiting for almost an hour, he started to make his way towards the road with Kilimanjaro in view. He quickly tested the air and then gave me my shots. We decided to call it a morning, and on the way back to the lodge, we found a hippo outside of the water and eating some grass under the scorching sun. It's pretty rare to see hippos out in the open like this, and it had a cattle egret on its back, which made for some great photos. On the afternoon drive, we decided to head towards the woodlands to look for new types of wildlife that we hadn't focused on yet. We found a herd of fighting zebras, which can be some of the meanest creatures in the entire animal kingdom. Zebras are a lot of people's favorite animals in all of Africa, but honestly, they're just such big jerks once you actually get to know them. We found them in a dusty area, so the hope was that they would rear up on their back legs and kick up some dust, but we couldn't quite get them to cooperate. Still, I hadn't seen zebras in the park until now, and I was happy to get photos in a different type of habitat for my portfolio. It was fun seeing different animals in the afternoon, like this hippo out of the water, and plenty of other subjects as the sun began to set. At last light, we tried our luck again with the lions, who were actually inching closer and closer to the road. It seemed like the whole pride was finally on the move, and they would spend the next hour or so just walking, then laying down, then walking, and then laying down again. The two pride males also followed from behind, which made for an impressive sight even if it was too dark for photos. As they laid down, a huge bull elephant started to walk behind them, but neither seemed too bothered by the other's presence. Africa is just wild. After 3 nights in Amboseli, it was time for us to go on one last morning safari before heading out of the park. I got to capture one last amazing Amboseli sunrise, before finding another herd of elephants coming out of the woodlands in the early morning light. Like clockwork, they all came out and headed our way, posing perfectly against the backdrop of Mount Kilimanjaro. What can I say? I could photograph elephants all day, every day. The herds eventually moved off towards the marshes of the park, but on this final morning I captured some of the best photos I've ever taken as a wildlife photographer. Sadly, it was time to say goodbye to Amboseli, but this was my most successful visit ever, with hundreds of photos of elephants in Mount Kilimanjaro, as well as other amazing wildlife. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, subscribe, and follow me on social media for more. In the next video, we'll head to one of the most iconic places in all of Africa, somewhere that can only be compared to the Garden of Eden, so stay tuned.